What's up everyone, Scott the TroutHammer here. So a couple months ago I did a video about my top 5 favorite trout lures, and the video was pretty successful. So I'm going to keep doing that series, and we're moving on to the next species that I'm going to tell you guys my top 5 favorite lures for. And since it's now pre-spawn, well, here in Oregon it should be pre-spawn if this weather stops going back to winter. But you know, the bait fish are coming in shallow, bass are coming in to follow them to feed up, so the bass are trying to feed up to spawn where it should be in our pre-spawn by now. Now I'm going to tell you my top 5 favorite bass lures just in time for the season. So just like the format with the first video, I'm going to do this in countdown format, going from my 5th favorite to my number 1 favorite. So my number 5 favorite bass lure is a Texas rigged creature. And I'll just show you some plastics that I commonly Texas rig, like Strike King Rage Tail, Denny Brower Craw, or their Menace Grub, Magnum Bug, Rage-tailed lizards, rage-tailed toads, things like that. But show you guys what a Texas rig looks like when it's all set up. I got one here that I was fishing actually earlier today. So you take a EWG hook or a straight shank flipping hook, and use a size depending on the lure you're going to use. This is a 2/0 hook for the size of this Huddleston craw that I was using. And then you also appropriately pair up a bullet weight, either lead or tungsten. I definitely recommend going tungsten, especially for Texas rigs, right behind that hook, and then you peg it in place with a bobber stop. And this is a 1/4 ounce tungsten weight that I'm using for this Texas rig. I mean, Texas rigs are really good for sort of like a Carolina rig. You can run them almost like a Carolina rig, just slow retrieve them off the bottom. It's going to look like a crawdad just kind of moving along the bottom, or a frog, whatever you're going to use for a Texas rig creature. But one of the best things for a Texas rig for bass fishing is bass tend to hang out around structure, be that bushes, limbs, grass, docks, stuff like that. And these things are one of the best ways to search around through that structure to get a bass into striking. The Texas rig by nature is a weedless design, and it's going to follow that weight as it falls. So it's going to look like a crawdad falling down, or it's going to look like a frog going down to try to get some food off the bottom, and those feet are going to start flapping like crazy. Another way a lot of guys run a Texas rig is they keep the peg all the way back here, so it allows the weight to be a little bit more free. That is an option that you can do. There are applications for that. Me personally, I run almost all my Texas rig with the weight pegged right up against the hook. With the Texas rig though, there's so few places that you can't fish a Texas rig, but I mean, one of the biggest advantages is, like I said, fishing it around structure. Great way to get bass into striking around that. All right, my number 4 favorite bass lure is, hear that? Is lipless crankbaits, specifically the Bill Lewis rattle traps. So lipless crankbaits, these things, you can fish these things at any depth, and these things get down near the bottom so much easier than normal crankbaits. But I'm mostly a river fisherman, and these things are some of the best lures to use in a river because the current does almost all the work for you, makes a ton of noise, great way to draw bass in, river bass, from a distance in striking. But the biggest reason why you fish a lipless crankbait, any crankbait really, for bass during the pre-spawn or any time of the year is that. So a lot of people wonder if you are catching a bass because you're using something that looks like their food. That does help, bring a wide selection of colors. Like, I got one that's like a southern craw, one that's like a sunfish color, that's things bass eat. Bring something that can match the hatch, but the biggest reason why you catch a bass with a lure like this is you're getting a reaction strike. Bass don't always strike because they're hungry. They don't think this is food all the time. A lot of times, they strike because this thing pisses them off. Bass are pretty territorial, especially when they're spawning, but mostly, that thing makes so much noise that it just irritates the bass, and they just go hit it just to get it out of this area. There's guys that, they primarily fish the bottom with the rattle traps and with other lipless crankbaits. That's an art. I mean, it really is, to be able to run this thing that deep for that long. But I mean, you can still run these things shallow. You can run these things any level of the water column. Just depends on how fast your retrieve is, where your rod tip is. But one of the biggest advantages a lipless crankbait has versus a regular crankbait is you can rip these things and yo-yo them. So the way you do that is you let it descend, and as it descends, it vibrates and makes all that noise, and then you rip your rod tip up and does the same thing on the way up and then swims back down, and it's on that downward swim that bass strike. And these are just some of the 1/2 ounce rattle traps I use. They make 1 ounce rattle traps. They even make rattle trap minis. And yeah, I've caught some pretty good sized bass on that lure. These are just caps to cover the hooks. On the bigger ones, I just put a rubber band on them to keep them together. Primarily pre-spawn and post-spawn and fall feed are the best times to throw these things. These things work really well also in the bigger lakes during the warmer months of the summer, because this thing can get down a lot easier to where the bass are going to be when the water is warmer and they want that colder water near the bottom. Okay, my number 3 favorite bass lure, and this is really one of the best lures to use in Oregon year-round. It works year-round. It works everywhere. Are Senko-style worms. Whether they be 5-inch worms, 4-inch worms, 3-inch worms. I mean, really any color, but try to match the colors that the bass are going to be keying into. Darker colors if the water's real dirty or if it's nighttime. The sort of like green pumpkin, watermelon flake, those things if you have really clear water. And rivers, anything that's silver and blue flake, anything like that, really, really good. Actually, just yesterday, my best friend and I were fishing in the Willamette, and this was the only thing catching bass. Here's an amazing thing about Senkos, though, and this is something even professional bass fishermen will say. A lot of people don't know how these things catch bass. I mean, it's just a stick. But I think one of the magical properties of a Senko worm, why they're so effective, is because they mimic nothing. It's like nothing the fish has seen. They see this thing falling on its own, and then you give it just a little bit of twitch, and they go, wait, that's food. I gotta get it before it's gone. So the size of hook you want to use depends on the size of worm you use. So on 5-inch Senkos, I use a 3/0 hook. On the 4-inch Senkos, I use a 2/0 hook. And on the 3-inch, I use a 1/0 hook. And those are EWG hooks for the Senko worms. You can also use worm hooks on Senkos. I find the EWGs work just a little bit better because you can rig them up a lot more weedlessly easily. Speaking of rigging them up weedlessly, so one of the big differences I've noticed between two particular brands, and I'll use in this demonstration, the Yama Senkos. So the Yama Senkos, these things are like half salt. These things have a lot faster fall through the water. They have a lot less buoyancy than other brands, like the other one I'll use an example, the Yum Worm. And where I've gotten almost all of my strikes on a Senko is on a very slow fall. The Yama Senkos fall a lot faster, even on a light wire hook, than the Yum ones do. Another advantage I've seen about the Yum Senkos versus the Yama Senkos. So the Yama Senkos, when you rig them up, that's pretty much it for the worm. You can use it maybe that one time, maybe another time if you can get the hook out real clean. But I mean, it damages the plastic a lot more than it does a Yama Senko. And also, if you want to rig this up completely Texas style, where you bury the point of the hook into the plastic, a lot harder to do, makes this have a lot less natural of a presentation. It kind of looks like a humpback fish or something like that. But these Yum Senkos, they have that sort of trench right here on the top of the hook that you just bring the hook up through and into that. Stays as a natural presentation, and it doesn't leave the hook point exposed. Well, it leaves it exposed for the bass to, on the bite, you can still set the hook real easily. But if you're coming through grassline, if you're coming through hydrilla, does not hang up at all. Surprisingly, a lot of people I fish with don't know how to fish Senko. So I'll tell you, I mean, you can rig these up a multitude of ways. 3 of my favorite ways to rig up Senkos. One is just on, like I said, the 1/0, 2/0, 3/0 hook, depending on the size of the worm you're using, but one of those EWG hooks, completely weightless. And cast it out, let it fall all the way to the bottom. Wait like 10 seconds. If you don't feel a strike, then just give it a couple twitches and let it fall to the bottom again. Just keep doing that. Treat it like a soft body jerk bait. Another way you can rig the Senko worm that is extremely effective is wacky style. So you take a mosquito hook and you rig it up right in the middle, and it sort of has this like little bit of a bow in the worm, and when you twitch it, it twitches like that. It looks like something that's injured trying to get away, something bass look for as an easy meal. My third favorite way to run a Senko is Carolina rig. I have a video I've already done on this channel explaining the Carolina rig, how you set it up, but using an EWG hook at the end of the leader and a Senko worm and just slowly rolling that off the bottom, and this thing will bounce up, fall. Just like I said with the rigging it up weedless and casting out, letting it go all the way to the bottom, Carolina rig keeps this thing on the bottom a lot longer. So for these last two, from my number 2 favorite bass lure, my number 1 favorite bass lure, this is what took me the longest time to make this video because I love both of these lures so much. They're so great. I kept going back and forth between which one was number 1, which one was number 2, and I finally decided to just make this decision. So my number 2 favorite bass lure is a chatterbait. Bass go absolutely ballistic for these things. So me personally, honestly, I only discovered the chatterbait about 3 years ago, and I felt like I was so behind the times once I started using it. The number of strikes these things get, the way you can run these things, phenomenal. There's other companies that make bladed style jigs just like a chatterbait. I always prefer the original, the Z-Man chatterbait. But sometimes you find a rare gem, you know, something that's pretty special, like this Picasso chatterbait style lure. Also has an underspin on the bottom. So just a little something extra to draw the fish in for a strike. You know, chatterbaits, the way they work is you rig up to that end of the swivel and you're actually connected to the blade. The blade is connected to the jig, and when you're reeling, this thing makes so much noise. This thing displaces so much water. If you're using really sensitive line, like if you rig this thing directly onto braid or fluorocarbon, you're going to feel how much that thing moves around. It's going to shock you. You know, one of the best things about chatterbaits is you can rig anything up as a trailer or even run them naked. I've caught so many fish on these things by themselves. I mean, trailers work phenomenal on these things, whether it's a crawdad or a swim bait trailer. Anything that moves, anything that makes more noise pairs up with the chatterbait really well. And you can fish these things on the bottom, you can fish these things on the top. You know, the nature of the lure, the way it's retrieved, this thing is weedless, so you can pop it through weed lines, you can pop it through grass lines, draw a reaction strike because it starts to fall after it comes out into visibility. It's almost like a crankbait in how much noise it makes, so you can fish it in dirty water, you can still fish in clear water. So many options on a chatterbait. My recommendation stays the same like what I said for the Senkos. Fish the darker colors in dirty water or low light conditions, and fish the more vibrant colors in clear water and or daylight. Yeah, you can run these things like jigs, you can run them like crankbaits, you can run them like swim baits that just make a little bit extra noise. Okay, my number one favorite bass lure is a jig. So I'm just showing you two different types of jigs that I commonly use. This is a structure jig right here. This is a swim jig. You see it sort of has almost like a the head of a fish on there. You know, you traditionally run up you rig up a swim bait plastic on this one. Any other kind of plastic on a jig. Jigs, they have probably the most versatility with bass fishing. The way you can use them, the places you can use them, what you can put on a trailer behind them, they just plain catch fish. For me as a bass fisherman, as a fan, I'm a Denny Brower guy. Denny Brower was the guy that made jigs a lot more mainstream than they were before he got into fishing. They were already pretty popular, but he just took it to a whole new league. Watch his videos, read his articles on how to fish jigs, but if you ask me, the biggest advantage a jig gives you is there is no place you can't fish a jig. There is no time of year you can't fish a jig. There is no time of day you can't fish a jig. This is a year-round bass catching machine. You know, the way it looks already like it is, it's almost like a Texas rig, so you could move it like a Texas rig, you know, flip it into cover, flip it into structure, moving around, try to get bass to react when they see something falling through their home. Just run it slowly on the bottom, looking like a creature just moving along on the bottom where bass are going to be anyway. But a great advantage that the jig has versus a lot of other bass lures is those skirts. So when this thing is suspended, when this thing isn't moving, those skirts are still moving. And that's one of the things that drives bass nuts. When they see that thing sitting still, they see the other little bits and they go, okay, that thing is actually alive. That's a meal. And that's even more so the case with finesse jigs, because finesse jigs usually have a lot shorter skirt near the head. Those things move a lot more, even in completely dead water. And it's not just that some of my best bass have come from jigs, but some of my biggest bass have come from jigs. So that right there, that is the jig that caught my personal best out of Adair Pond, was a 4-pound bass. A little 1/16 ounce jig like that. Big bass ate it. And that was very situational to what the bass was looking for. I was able to recognize it. 2 casts in, got that bass. But I mean, it's one of the things about jigs, they mimic everything a bass is looking for. There's really no way to go wrong with a jig. Definitely my favorite bass lure if you ask me. So there you guys go. I'm going to keep this series going. I decided to pick a different angle because I had a lot of complaints for the lighting that was behind me the last time I recorded this video. I decided to do it tonight in the evening so there was less harsh light behind me, and it's also probably a lot easier to see me under the light in my workshop. But yeah, like I said, I'm going to keep these series of videos rolling. I'm probably going to do one a month, and I'm going to try to keep it relevant to the season and what you would fish for and what you would use to catch the fish with. But let me know what you guys thought in the comments below. Please keep this conversation going. I'd like to know what your favorite bass lures are. If you guys like this video, if you guys found this video helpful, please leave a like on your way out. Please subscribe. I'm trying to get this channel to grow to 1,000 subscribers. Gonna need your help to do that, so we are on the run to 1,000 subscribers. Other than that, thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, tips up, sight lines, and have fun fishing.